Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Action Items, produced by Let's Talk Supply Chain and brought to you by New Gen Architects, your partner in supply chain technology implementations. So I am very excited for episode number 10. Our guest this month needs no introduction at all, Mr. Supply Chain. He is the author of Supply Chain for Dummies, and we are excited to host him today. Nicole, you can go ahead and let everyone see Daniel. Thank you for joining and accommodating your schedule. Everyone that's joining today, I know we normally meet at 10 o'clock Eastern. Thank you for sticking around until this afternoon to hang out with us. Jonathan, Sneha, Nikki, we got some regulars already coming. So I know this is going to be a great show, a great conversation. If anyone is still hanging out, I know normally we get a couple of people from the other side of the Atlantic, a little bit of North and West Africa, India. If anyone is sticking around to hang out with us, please show yourself. Let us know who you are so that I can give you a very, 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 very big thank you and affectionately make fun of you a little bit because it is Friday night. And what are you doing watching a supply chain show? I guess the same thing I'm doing, hosting a supply chain show on Friday night.
Is there a better way to spend a Friday night than hanging out talking supply chain?
I used to spend Saturday. So Sneha and I actually met during the pandemic. The supply chain revolution used to do a Saturday like happy hour brunch hour deal. And I would every Saturday be very excited for it. And I was actually thinking as I was getting ready, I was like, dude, anyone that's joining Friday night is like same level of supply chain nerd as me. And like, I want to be your friend because I want to be able to just like nerd out on all the supply chain stuff. Mohammed from Morocco. So we are in the same general time frame, or time zone right now. I don't know if maybe Morocco's an hour ahead, hour behind on the same wavelength. Either way, it's Friday evening. So a little jab.
And we're gathering the tribe. For folks that work in global supply chain, time is so relative anyway.
You know what?
Right?
That's very true. That's very, very true.
I mean, we're all just so used to this, right? It's like, well, when's a good time to schedule the meeting? Well, whose personal life do you really want to screw up? Or can we take turns with it? Because we can't do everything at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m, right?
Right.
But the great thing about doing the LinkedIn Lives like this is it's fabulous that when people join live, but it gets recorded so that the folks that, maybe perhaps have something else to do on a Friday evening or have urgent work that they're trying to get done.
They have something else to do Friday night. They prefer to spend their Saturdays.
Right.
Very true. And you know what, Daniel? That's a good point because that's actually something that I do not do well. These are recorded with LinkedIn, but also on YouTube. And I don't do a good job of sharing out the links when people, do miss the show. So I will probably not do anything about that, but I will know and feel guilty about it. And
that's almost as good as taking action.
I'll be saying the same thing.
Right? We could do something or we could just feel guilty about it. I'm good with feeling guilty.
I'll add it to my Google tasks. And like that'll make me feel like I did something so that eventually I will get to it. But I will say there are things that have been on my Google task list and in my personal ClickUp for like a year. Actually, was talking to a guy that works with us, Andre, and I was like, yeah, this stuff has been in here for like a year. So it's urgent, but also not, because if it were urgent, it would have been done a year ago. And then when he opened it up, he was like, oh, there are notes from here really from September 2021. And I was like, yeah, like a full year, just on my to-do list.
My inbox right now, I have 35,503 unread messages.
How do you let it get that bad?
See, that is years worth of neglect. However, there is an approach that I've heard people talk about. I haven't tried it yet, but it would apply to your Google task list too. At the end of the year, December 31st, going into a new year, as a part of the purge and
Just
trying to
delete
be a
it
better
all?
person, there's a word for it: email bankruptcy. And you can actually then just put that in the footer of your email or the header of your email. On January 1st, I declared email bankruptcy. Anything that you sent me before that, you'll probably have to resend. It's gone.
Resend it again. And you know
Yeah.
what? I also I don't remember where I saw this, but they said like it was someone who came back from vacation and just deleted everything that was in her inbox. And the person next to her was like, "Well, why would you do that?" She said, "Oh, if it's important, they'll email again." So my inbox is clear, and if it's important, they'll email
Right.
again.
Totally.
So yeah. Alrighty, guys. So this week, as you guys know, we are all about actionable things that you can do to improve your supply chain and product operations right away. Relatively speaking, right away could be a week for you, right away could be a month for you, whatever the pace of your business is. But we don't like pie in the sky conversations around what you should do that we all know will take you years to do. And it's so overwhelming that you probably don't even want to think about it. So, with that said, this month's topic, we are going to be talking about project implementation methodologies. And Daniel is going to talk us through the direct method. And we are going to talk about exactly how that can be used for the projects that you are thinking about embarking on. And then specifically giving some tips and tricks or things to avoid potential pitfalls so that you don't find yourself in a situation of trying to revive an implementation or a project gone off the rails. I tried to be as nice as I could in saying that.
Wow. Right?
So if you mucked it up already, we're going to talk about how to like, I guess I couldn't just also just say it. If you find yourself in a situation to where you're like, we did this all wrong, you can still fix it. Will it be a lot harder than if you had just done it right the first time? Yes, but doesn't mean it's all is lost. Doesn't mean all is lost. So Daniel, talk to us a little bit about, I know when we did the pre-show, we talked about like agile versus waterfall and different project methodologies. And this, as we talked about, does not have to be specifically related to a supply chain software or like a new technology. You can do projects around many different topics, and it doesn't have to be technology related. So in looking at different methodologies, what did you really see was missing for you to say, nah, this has to be something else? Direct is the answer to that.
Sure. When you say it that way, like project implementation methodologies, it sounds really fancy, and I like that. But when I think about implementation methodologies for supply chain projects, and by the way, I really think so the way that we make changes in a supply chain is through projects. And so as a supply chain professional, you really have to have a good handle on project management, right? In order to be successful, because things are always changing in supply chains. And so there are some really good methodologies out there that have really evolved more or less since World War II. A lot of this stuff actually started with the Navy and the Air Force in World War II. But, you talk about waterfall as a methodology, and that's the way most of us learn project management, where you list all the things that need to happen and then you sequence them. And so it's, we call it waterfall because it's one after the other, just going down the waterfall. And that makes a lot of sense if you're doing something like designing a new product, right? Where there are steps that you have to go through to get approval, certification, source suppliers, or standing up a new facility where, like you have to pour the foundation before you can put up the structure. Although it turns out that's not the way they do it in Europe. Apparently, in a lot of European distribution centers, they put up the structure and then pour the floor. Somebody explained that to me. I find it fascinating that so there are some places where that waterfall approach really makes a lot of sense. What we have discovered sort of more recently, last 30 years, is in the world of software development, that kills you. Because really, when you're putting the project plan together, it's a model for the future. You're anticipating what's going to happen. And when you're developing software, there are so many uncertainties and so much complexity that getting locked into that sort of waterfall plan actually becomes sort of a trap. And so we've developed a new approach, which generally we call agile, which involves sort of like picking a chunk of work, doing that work, getting it done, testing it, implementing it, and then picking the next thing to work on. Totally different approach, right? This is kind of a spiral or circular development model. That's good too. That's, I consider a methodology. There are other methodologies that we use, like lean, right? I consider, doing, a lot of lean Kaizen stuff is really a project management
I
methodology.
literally just wrote that down. I was going to ask
Right?
you.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you in the context of everything you talked about, where would something like lean or Kaizen
Totally.
or plan, do, check, act come in, and is it not necessarily more of the same, but a little bit of a twist? Do they all come together?
Right. And then the other one that, another one for sure that we'd throw in is Six Sigma, right? Doing DMAIC or DMEDI. They're methodologies. So what I was going to say was a very long setup before I talk about my stuff, right? But those are all approaches that we need to understand in supply chain management, because we're going to work on projects that involve those methodologies. What I have found, though, is that there is sort of a layer above that I'll call it the lens that leaders need to look through, and maybe even more than project managers, it's for being project leaders or project sponsors, that says no matter what methodology you're using, are you getting the right things done? Are you doing are you covering all of the bases that need to be covered for a project to be successful? And that is where I use the direct acronym. And so now we'll talk about, what are those things? And by the way, your setup for that was perfect, because where this came from was me looking at projects that had blown up and asking the question, what did we miss? What went wrong? And then, how do I put that in a bucket to make sure that we're thinking about that with whatever methodology we're using? So what's the first thing?
I don't know if you agree with this or how true this is, because I haven't truly thought through it other than like the last 30 seconds. But if I think about if I think about waterfall, agile, some of those, I mean, even in like typical Kaizen, plan, do, check, act, the things that you mentioned with certain university programs, that you talk about that, it's the textbook, you learn these things. And if I think about also my experience in doing project implementations, and also what I know about the direct method, is that these methodologies, I find them to be, again, very quick 30-second thought, very focused on like the product itself, for lack of a better term, and not all the other stuff. So it's very much like, oh, what are we going to build? Is this the right thing? But all the other stuff is like, oh, we'll do some change management, which may or may not mean anything at all, depending on who you're talking to. But it sounds nice to say it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I maybe I think the way that I would describe what I heard you say is, when we talk about project management methodologies, it's actually very operational. But as leaders, we also need to have a more tactical or even a more strategic view to say, are we creating the right
Yes.
context? Are we doing all the right things for this project, which, we could treat as a product to be successful with its launch?
Correct. That is exactly what I'm saying. Thank you for putting those words together for me. I recently found out that I am an outward processor. And that is a really nice way to say that I just talk and talk and talk, but the words don't always make sense. So
Welcome
it's
to the
great
club.
to have. I'm just going to keep you with me all the time
Yeah.
so that I don't have to say. So what I mean is you can just say what Dyci means is,
but
what she could have said in 140 characters or less.
Yeah, there's the fine line, because like on the one hand, you don't want to be putting words in somebody else's mouth, right? Because like we can, but on the other hand, I'm very much an outward processor too, but I write a lot. And so I've had a chance to do the processing, get it down to 140 characters, and then I can play it back quicker from having done it.
We've got a good conversation going on in the comments. I'm not sure how much you're looking at them.
No, I'm outward processing. Should I be?
Well, Nikki says that we should stop running our supply chain communications via email. So I feel there's a meme. Someone make a meme for that. We have the the spreadsheet one. If you could stop running your supply chain on a spreadsheet, that would be great. If you could stop just putting everything in email that's so hard to track and maybe got misunderstood. We can fix that. That's great.
Although, Nikki, I do have a contrarian view on that, which is I use email as my filing system, right? I can go back for at this point a decade and track down commitments that I've made or that other people have made to me, or brilliant ideas that I've had that I never actually did anything with. So on the one hand, we hate it and it clogs up my hard drives like crazy. And on the other hand, I can't live without it.
Yes, it's you what is it? You can't live with it, can't live without it kind of thing. I don't know. I will say I like workflows better in systems. I like to be able to go in and read a comment or something versus an email. But I think email is very much like Excel. I think regardless of how fancy you get into technology, you're always going to need Excel for something. Like you're not going to get out of Excel. You're not going to get away from, email communications.
Can I tell you my email trap real quick? And Nikki, this doesn't help, but it's, part of, understanding your own addictions and problems. I find something that I'm interested in, and then they give me the opportunity to sign up for a newsletter or for updates. And I'm like, in that one moment, I got fascinated. Yes. Like today's, thing, it was, I was reading an article about robots for Venus, right? And I could totally, in the moment, sign up for a newsletter that will, for the next decade, send me daily updates about research on robots for Venus.
Or you could just unsubscribe.
Yeah, but that's hard, right? But that
you could also.
But then I'm admitting that I'm no longer that I wasn't really interested in it, and I probably shouldn't have signed up for it in the first place.
No,
and
you made the decision in the moment with the information that you had. And that's what it is. Quick question from Jonathan.
Yes.
Do you have any recommendations for books for agile methodologies?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Great courses on LinkedIn Learning. And I will tell you one of my favorite courses. It's two LinkedIn Learning instructors, and I'm embarrassed. It's Chris Croft, and I'm trying to remember the other fellow's name. I'll have to look it up. But they do this amazing conversation comparing waterfall and agile methodologies. Doug Rose. It's Chris Croft and Doug Rose. And I can give you the link so we can put it in the notes for the show. But Chris Croft is a very traditional operations waterfall sort of project manager like I am, and does this very sarcastic interview with Doug Rose about what is this agile stuff anyway, and why does it really matter? And they do a great job of explaining where one makes sense and where another is better, and why, for example, you would never want to design a bridge using agile methodologies, right? It just doesn't make sense. But
Right.
designing software with waterfall creates some additional cost and risk, and actually reduces the value of a project.
I think that is, I think it is important for us to really drive that point home, in that everything, as wonderful as it sounds, as tried and true as it is, does not necessarily mean it's going to work for whatever you're trying to do. So take the
Totally.
time to really figure out what methodology is going to be the best, and not just because, oh, I read this really great book about Agile and Scrum and I totally get it. To your point, you should probably not like build a bridge and then demo it and then build a little bit more and then demo it
Right.
again, and then get some other required and then push the user stories and rebucket them. You should probably
Right.
not do that with everything.
Um,
But you
eh,
have some LinkedIn learning courses also around project implementations, right? Or did I misunderstand?
No, absolutely. So I've got my LinkedIn learning courses are in two categories: supply chain management and project management. And so I've got a bunch of stuff on both sides. And by the way, I'm working on a course now. Shh, don't tell anybody because I don't think it's public. But my next LinkedIn learning course is actually going to be about managing supply chain projects. So bringing those two together. But
So
just
if
back
it's not
to,
public yet and we're not telling anybody,
I
do we know
know.
when that might be released? Or is
We
it
don't.
like,
We don't.
okay.
Yeah, I honestly, because it turns out first I have to write the course. I have to finish up the scripts, and then we'll have
Oh
to
yeah,
record it.
that's a
Yeah.
thing. You do have to do that
So,
part of it.
um, we'll get there, but it should be out within, I think, the next 6 months. Would be what I would expect. But that assumes sort of a waterfall approach rather than doing a bunch of scrums. Um, but I wanted to go back to the conversation about methodology. We do have this tendency to sort of jump on the management flavor of the week, whether that's lean or Six Sigma or agile, um and the truth is, when I look at it, and I think when we look at these things with sort of the benefit of some time, it's like new tools in the toolbox. And it's not that any one is the right hammer to use on every
Right.
nail. It's, this is a different way, and it could be better if we understand how to use it, when and where to use it. Um, but that doesn't mean it is necessarily superior in every way. Which, by the way, brings us back to what the whole show was promised to be talking about, was this direct approach, right?
Right.
So let me
Which
do
we
that
should get
quick.
to, because we only have 20 minutes. And the last
Ah,
show was the first show where I didn't get through all of the action items, and I don't want to make it a habit.
okay, so
So we're
the
gonna
the things
get,
we have to,
so
am,
yes.
am I doing it or not? You tell me. What do you want? Go.
Tell us about the direct methodology. The
Okay,
D in direct method, I will get you started. The D in direct methodology stands
right?
for define
Six
the
six
objective.
things. Six things we have to do as leaders, no matter what approach we're using. Number one, we have to define the objective. What's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the goal we're trying to reach? Number two, we have to investigate our options, right? And that's really, the fancy words for that, doing due diligence. Number three, resolve to a course of action. We've got to come up with a plan that everybody agrees to, that makes sense for the business and for the people that have to do the work. The fourth one, we need to execute that plan. But executing the plan also involves having a scope change management if we need to do it. The fifth thing, we need to change over from the old way to the new way, right? Whatever that is, turning on the switch, opening up the facility, doing the go live, that change very often the people working on the team underestimate how significant it is to actually do the go live. And then the sixth one, the last, and in many cases, the most important and the one that gets overlooked is transitioning the people, right? Really thinking about all of the ways that our project is going to affect all of our stakeholders, and making sure that we're helping those people adjust and accept the new thing. So those stakeholders could be our customers, they could be members of our staff, they could be our project team who is out of a job as soon as the project is over. So all of that to say, with the direct method, as leaders, I find that's a really useful way of asking myself and my teams, have we done all of the things that we need for this project to be successful? Do we have a clearly defined objective? Did we investigate our options? Once we did that, did we put together a good plan? Did we resolve the course of action? Flip that around. So often, when I have stepped into the middle of a muck that has been created, or when I have found myself in a project when things started going south, I can take a step back and say, okay, what did we miss? And a lot of times it becomes really
Don't tell
easy
me.
to identify. Oh, okay, I'm
So
not telling you.
I
Go.
was actually thinking, I was gonna say, what do you think is the culprit? Where do people get caught up, which causes things to go off the rail? And I was gonna say, my guess was either number 3 or number 6.
Yeah.
So either resolving to a course of action or transitioning the people. And my first thought for resolving to a course of action is because I think that it's possible that a lot of people don't resolve to the correct course of action, or everyone is not aligned on the course of action. And then it doesn't matter how well you do everything else. That number 6 of transitioning the people just doesn't happen because there was no real alignment and inclusivity when the course of action was determined. That's my thought. But what has your experience shown you?
Can I be honest? I've seen
Number 1,
every one of the 6, every
everything.
one of them, right? Because a lot of times, like there are lots of ways that you can mess up every one of the 6, to be honest, right? So like what you described with putting together the wrong plan, I've seen that a lot of times where you put together a plan to do what the boss told you to do, rather than asking the question or taking time to investigate the options
Mhm.
and really figure out what's the right thing for the organization. Um, instead of coming up with the best solution, you end up with what I call the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion. And
Oh, I love that.
right? But that doesn't mean it's the right answer, right?
Mhm.
And I've seen it happen, not intentionally, but where, it's just the culture of the organization. People defer to, somebody else instead of recognizing, listen, I'm really a subject matter expert on my part of the business, and that doesn't make, the thing that you're proposing doesn't make sense to me, and here's why. But rather than, getting folks involved and say, well, let's look at what our other options are. You just move forward with the hippo, put together a plan, execute it, and then what do you get? Like you say, it's really hard to transition, and because people hate the new thing for legitimate reasons in that case, right? And you end up with buyer's remorse. You've spent a whole bunch of money to do something, and you look at it and you go, that was a mistake. Right?
Right.
There would have been better ways to spend the money, or we had it better off before, right?
Mhm.
So,
And I've I've
I
I've heard that before.
yeah,
I've heard someone has said, like, in a training that was poorly designed from the beginning. because there was not enough focus on, changing over to the new system or process. There was underestimation of how long that was going to take, as you said. And that meant that the transition didn't actually happen. And the team didn't want to, like we have the comment here. And a lot of that, from what I saw, is that it would manifest itself in saying, why didn't we just keep doing whatever we were doing? Which is not really, it doesn't necessarily mean that the old way was better. And if the old way was working fine, you wouldn't have actually done this. Someone decided, yes, you have your hippo situation, but we know that it's not working the way that it should be, or that there's a better way. But if you don't do the transition the right way, that's how it manifests in, why don't we just keep the old way? This sucks.
So, well, and so you see symptoms of this all the time, right? Where like you implement a new system and everybody takes credit for it's done, but the people that are doing the work are actually doing it in Google Sheets and spreadsheets, and then re-entering the data in the new system to make it look like it's actually working, right? I mean, I think we've all seen that bunches of times. Or, where you've got people that are, entering the work in the new system, but they're still entering it in the old system too, because, there's one report that they can't get out of the new system and they need that report to be able to do their job. So you end up, actually creating more work rather than reducing it.
Right.
And what I love about, direct as an approach is it allows you to go back in and do sort of a forensic analysis on that. Okay, we have people now entering information in two different systems. Why is that? Did we not define the problem properly? Did we not investigate our options? Did we not come up with a good plan? Or did we just not transition well? But the truth is, it can be in any one of those buckets. The good news, I mean, my practical experience has been, you can usually find it if you use those buckets and you're honest with yourself. And then you have the option to either fix it or continue to live with the pain.
Right. And it's, you know what, I think that to your point, I completely agree. If you're honest and say, let's just put the cards on the table, guys, no one's going to get in trouble. Let's look at these 6 different steps. What do we miss? What do you feel like is missing here? Whether it's one thing, multiple things, etc. I think that this methodology is so all encompassing that, and it doesn't, what I really like about it is that it doesn't push you, or maybe I guess it's methodology agnostic. You can do it with waterfall, you can do it with agile, because when you resolve to your course of action and you execute on the plan, that's where you're figuring out what type of project is this going to be. Is it going to be a Kaizen event? Is it going to, are we going to use data? Like that's where that piece comes into it. But you're also considering everything else. Why are we even here? And did we look at all of the best ways to approach this? And why did we decide this was the best way? Because if you can look at the why you're deciding to do it this way and investigating your options, you can also pinpoint whether or not it was a hippo moment, or like, were we all just going along to get along, or did we actually sit down? Because it's also very possible. And, the other side of it is that you don't want people to be afraid to take risks. You want them to take calculated risks. You hear the sayings all the time: fail fast, learn faster. Failure is an option. And it is easy to say it, but you also have to have that culture. You know what I mean? Everyone has to feel comfortable with saying, okay, you know what, we're going to make the best decision that we can, but also recognizing that it might not go exactly the way that we want it to go. So there is also the fine line of doing it the right way and not using the fact, because and I've talked about this on another show, I think when we were talking about ERP implementations, there's the statistic that like, such this large percentage, I've seen 67, I've seen 76, I've seen high as 90, depending on how you use the data, percentage of projects fail. But that's not an excuse to say, it was probably not going to work out anyway. A lot of people, I think, are using that as an excuse to cut corners because to follow something like the direct methodology, it does like it's a lot more time consuming than just, okay, let's skip right to, demoing software, even though we haven't figured out, like, we don't know why we're doing it. What this is a hippo moment. The boss said, look for software. So now we're just going to start looking for software, even though we have no idea why. We don't have process documented and defined. And then we get to the end of it and we're, sinking cost in 18 months of time, but you could have avoided that. But the answer is going to be, oh, well, like, these fail anyway. We put budget in there, risk management, blah, blah, blah.
For me, when you're doing formal project management, it does add overhead, right? And so you have to be able to justify, why are we spending the time and the additional cost? And I think the answer is we add value by reducing risk, right? We're de-risking the investment for the organization by managing the project. How do we de-risk it? By having clearly defined requirements and objectives, by ensuring that we have considered other options and selected the one that we feel has the lowest risk and the highest probability of success and return, right? By ensuring that we have a good plan in place and good processes to execute it. So I do see, the direct approach as, I'll say, not necessarily as a way of adding costs, but as a way of justifying or ensuring that the costs that we're adding are meaningful for the business, that they're a good investment. The thing that I like about direct, by the way, I don't usually use direct stuff, like you say, as an implementation methodology. I use it. It tends to be more of an informal check, right? That, it doesn't matter to me whether a client's working with a waterfall, because every company has their own project management template structure system, and PMI has theirs, and Agile works in its own way. And I'm agnostic. I'm flexible enough. I can step into any of those, but I do the check on myself to go, is the objective clearly defined, or can I see that these two people have different expectations for the project, right? And direct helps me then focus in on what the problem is. What's great then is we have tons of tools in the toolkit that we can use to treat the problem once we've diagnosed it correctly, right?
Right.
For example, we run into a situation where we have a project plan, but things aren't getting done, or, we're not getting good updates. What do we do if it's not clear who's supposed to be doing the work? Say, oh, you know what? Let's sit down and put together a RACI matrix and make sure that everybody understands what their role on each task is, right? So for me, the direct approach helps me zero in on where we have gaps. Then I can start pulling tools out of the toolkit that I know will help get us aligned and address those gaps. And then it just sort of works. And everybody goes, oh yeah, we did a good job. And it's never about the, good project management. It's just because we did a good job as a team getting this project done.
I think project management is one of those things to where it's very much like supply chain. When it's going well, no one notices it. It's just like, oh, it was supposed to be done this way. When it doesn't go well, when you don't have stuff on the shelves, when things are late, that's when people are like, oh, supply chain is going wrong. Oh, the project management, went off the rails. It's one of those things that, like, if it's going well, you shouldn't even really know that it's there.
And the two other places that you see that make perfect analogies, the conductor for an orchestra and the director for a movie. Right?
Yes.
Which
absolutely.
Is why I love, and I feel so fortunate that we have direct as the acronym to remember it, because at the end of the day, that's what we need to be doing as project managers, as project leaders, is we need to be directing. We don't need to be playing every instrument. We just need to make sure that the right instruments are coming in on tune at the right time.
Right. I do have one more question. Nicole has given 10-minute warning. She's given 5-minute warning. She's also put the next show date, which I think is her way of saying, DC, start wrapping it up. It doesn't seem like you're wrapping it up. Because normally I will say our next show is thank you for coming,
Right.
but she's like, next show. So everyone, next show is November 11th. And I'll look forward to seeing you there. We've only got 2 more shows for this year, and then we'll be going into 2023. We did have a question, Daniel, if you just want to, depending on how, I don't want to say if you want to wrap this up, because I do have another question if we have a little bit more time.
Outward thinker.
Yes. Boris asked, and maybe I'll tie my question to this. Boris did ask a question about applying design thinking to, I believe it was Boris that I saw. Yes. Is it possible to make changes in projects with design thinking in supply chain? And I wanted to get your thoughts about that, because I have looked into design thinking and, studied it a little bit. I think it's undervalued and not really talked about enough as it relates to supply chain projects. And I'm saying I'm going to tie my question with that because I'm assuming that in 3rd edition of Supply Chain Management for Dummies that is coming out, people can read more about the direct methodology as well as, or direct approach, as well as, maybe case studies, specific tools, customers, or companies, things like that. But I last time we spoke, you weren't sure exactly when that was coming out, but also coming.
You mean I'm supposed to plug my stuff too?
Yeah.
So we'll put links to my LinkedIn learning courses, and I do have a LinkedIn learning course called Leading Projects, which walks through using the direct approach and a lot of the different tools in it. So we can do a link to that. And yes, I've just wrapped up the manuscript for the 3rd edition of Supply Chain Management for Dummies. I got the email from my editor saying, put your pencil down, right? Like
don't put any more in there.
Done. You're done.
Put this in the parking lot.
Right.
We'll get to
right.
this in the next version of
we're waterfalling this, right? Or this scrum is over. So I will say I certainly not an expert in design thinking. I associate design thinking very much with systems thinking and system dynamics. One of the things I find really interesting about supply chains is we talk all the time about engineering a supply chain, designing a supply chain. But I think the reality is supply chains are emergent, right? We would like to think that we engineer and design them, but the reality is they sort of appear and we have some control, and we can certainly change them through projects. And I think that's very much where design thinking comes into play. If, well, the supply chain is this, but how do we want it to be, and why do we want it to be there? And how can we change it to make that happen? Well, those are projects or how that gets done. The other thing, though, that I think is really important for all of us to just be comfortable with is, when you're dealing with complex systems that have these emergent behaviors, you get surprises. You get things like the butterfly effect. You get things like the bullwhip effect, right? Where these systems behaviors that emerge that you can't necessarily predict in advance, right? They're kind of unintended consequences. And so, we have the supply chain that we have today. It behaves in the way it behaves. We make a change because we want those behaviors to be different. but as a result, we end up with new behaviors that we didn't anticipate, right?
Exactly.
And so while I think design thinking in that sense plays an important role, I think we also have to be open to, the reality that there's a bit of chaos theory in supply chains,
Mhm.
right? And we got to be comfortable rolling with those punches and being honest about what's really happening and what we can and can't control.
Absolutely. Well, Tempest said might need an hour. We might need an hour.
I
We will.
I'm
I
good,
will think
but
about that going into 2023. It might be an hour, or I just might need to be more succinct and stick with my plan when I get on once this goes live, then I get all
right.
on my tangents. So we'll think about it. But thank you so much for joining, Daniel. Thank you for everyone that is joining this evening, early morning, if it happens to be early morning. Everyone have a great weekend and go out and kick Few4's ass. We're at the end of the year.